Hello everyone, today we're going to learn how to multiply real numbers. We're also going to identify and use properties of multiplication and solve multi-step problems involving multiplying real numbers. So the rules for multiplying integers: when you multiply two positive integers, the answer is positive. When you multiply two negative integers, the answer is positive. When you multiply two integers with different signs, the answer is negative. Let's give an example. Two positive integers, 2 times 4, would result in a positive 8. Oops. When you do negative 2 times negative 10, the result is positive 20. When you multiply two integers with different signs, 4 and negative 5, your result is a negative. So in that case, it would be a negative 20. Love the sound effects. Feel free to try these at your own pace while I do some of them on the board. I have 6 times negative 4, which is going to result in a negative 24. 4 times 2, both positive, your result or product is positive 8. 3 times 4 is going to be a negative 12. When you have different sign numbers, your result is negative. Number 4, negative 6 times 4 is a negative 24. You should be able to complete the rest of this page in your packet now. As you complete the problems, number 5 should be negative 20. Number 6 would be negative 12 again. 7 is negative 30. 8 becomes positive 2. 9 becomes positive 16. 10, if you do 11 times 12, a lot of you struggle with this on a quiz. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. You're done with the ones digits. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Keep organized. When you add, 2 plus 0 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. You end up with a positive 132. For 11, you have a product of negative 35, and 12 is a negative 54. Feel free to complete 13 through 24 at this time. And pause the video as the class is working, please. All right, at this point, the whole class should be done with the remaining problems. 13, 10 times 5 is 50. 14, 9 times 2 is 18. 15 would be a negative 84. 16 would be a negative 96. Oh, and now we have 3 values. You can use the commutative property of multiplication to rearrange these, or you can just multiply from left to right. I would rather do 9 times 6 is 54, and 54 times 10 is 540. But you could use a different strategy if you'd like. For 18, negative 6 times negative 8 is 48, and 48 times the negative 10 becomes a negative 480. Once again, you could have multiplied from left to right, and you'll get the same product. 7 times 7, I know, is 49, and if you do 49 times 9, your result is 441. 6 times 6 is 36, times a negative 2 becomes a negative 72. Negative 5 times negative 4 is positive 20, and 20 times negative 10 is negative 200. 9 times 9 in this case would be 81, times the negative 5 is going to be a negative 405. You can use the commutative property of multiplication to rearrange these values. For 23, your product should be 192, and 24 should be negative 175. Now we're going to look into the properties of multiplication. The commutative property states that the order you multiply two numbers will not change the product. Here's an algebraic example and then an example with integers. The associative property says that the way you group three numbers in a product does not change the result. So you could do the quantity A times B times C, and that would be equal to A times the quantity B times C. I believe the example with the numbers makes a little more sense. If you did the math this way, it would be equal on either side, proving the associative property. The identity property of a number and the product of a number and one is that number. And the property of 0 is any number times 0 is 0. Property of -1 states that the product of a number and -1 is the opposite of the number. You have to memorize these properties. If you love making index cards, this is for you. Put the example on one side, the name of the property on the other side. I will not make you have to spell them properly, but you need to be able to come up with the different properties. Commutative, you're changing the order you multiply two things. Associative, you're changing the order you multiply three things. Identity, what you start with is what you end with. Property of 0, not that hard. It's multiplying by 0 equals 0. Property of -1, not that bad. Multiply by -1, it changes the sign. Let's see if we can identify these properties now on the next bit of our packet. All right, multiplying -1 by a number changes its sign. I know that one. It's the multiplicative property of -1. For 5, you're changing the order you multiply two values. That is the commutative property of multiplication. 3, you're changing the way you multiply three values. That's the associative property of multiplication. 7, 0 times a number is 0. That's the 0 property. 8, you're rearranging how you multiply two numbers. That's a commutative property. And 19, when you multiply by -1, it changes the sign. That's the property of -1. Here are a few more. When you're rearranging three values, that's the associative property. Multiplying by 0 is the multiplicative property of 0. Changing the order you multiply two numbers is the commutative property. Multiplying by -1 is going to be the multiplicative property of -1. And a number times 1 equals that number. That's the identity. That's a tough one to recognize. At this point, you need to complete your packet, and then after you go through the answers, you will begin your study guide.